You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, we're back again. This is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis, and I am Mighty Blue. This week, I have been having my own midlife crisis as I moved home, combining my home and my girlfriend Dana's home into one. It's been quite a week, but we've come through it and the house is at last taking shape. However, there has been a casualty this week. In my main interview with this week's guest, Ryan Schlosser, he just couldn't hear me at all. As usual, I'd set myself up, this time in my new closet, turned on the recording software, and I could see and hear Ryan. But my microphone just wouldn't work. It was plugged in. I hadn't changed the settings, and I just couldn't work it out what I'd done wrong. In the end, I moved over to my iPhone headphones mic, and, well, that isn't as good. You can certainly hear the difference, but it doesn't really affect the interview. Anyway, just as I'm putting stuff away, I noticed one small detail. I actually turned the microphone on. Yep, the reason he couldn't hear was because my mic was switched off. I don't like using my age as an excuse, but I think we need to put this down to a senior moment. Anyway, as I mentioned, Ryan Schlosser is today's guest, and he has recently completed the AT this year, so it was interesting to hear about his journey. As you're going to hear, I played a small part in his journey that we'll talk about in the interview. Also on today, we catch up with Mr. President, Bill Tickner, who we last spoke to in Connecticut, about to hit the delis. Now he's in New Jersey. Bill will be on after Ryan. Finally, Fozzie is looking forward to trail days, but he shares a story about a blighted shelter on the AT. First, though, we have Ryan Schlosser, or YearBook. I want to introduce you all to Ryan Schlosser, one of a fairly rare breed. Ryan was and is a successful member of the class of 2020, the most blighted class in the history of the AT. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good, Steve. Good to be on the show. And yeah, we definitely had a different experience than I think you or most people who have hiked in past years have.
You had experience unlike any other. And as I say, you stuck with the trail and you finished a few weeks ago. So this is, I think it was something like August the 7th you finished, was it?
Correct.
So we're now recording a month later. How are you feeling? Firstly, how are you feeling physically?
Physically good. It took about 2 weeks for my strength to come back and for me to feel healthy. And that was about the first time since Virginia that I could say I felt physically healthy. Wow. So I've been building on that for the past 2 weeks. A lot of yoga, a lot of stretching, some rock climbing, trying to get some muscle mass and weight back on. So feeling healthy, which is awesome to be able to say.
So that moment when you finished, did you feel physically broken? Because I certainly did.
You know, when I was on top of Katahdin, I felt like I was on a day hike at that point. I didn't really have too many emotions outside of just enjoying being there. I think I really processed my thru hike coming to an end mentally and physically at A-Ball Bridge 2 nights before I finished. And in that moment, that
is a special moment when you come out of the woods and get to A-Ball Bridge, isn't it? And you move on into that next phase, which is the final phase, which should be about, and probably is nearly always about, just the enjoyment of it, then, isn't it?
As soon as I saw that view of Katahdin from A-Ball Bridge and knew that I had 9 miles and then 5 miles till I was done with the AT, it felt like all of it was behind me, and the rest of it I was excited to just enjoy.
Can you imagine what it must be like, though, to get injured in those last couple of days? And, you've done this 2,190 odd miles to get, or 180 miles to get there. And suddenly you fall over either climbing Katahdin or in that little walk between the A-Ball Bridge and the end. That would be terrible for someone, wouldn't it?
It would be truly heartbreaking. I don't know. Well, that's the thing is Katahdin is such an extreme mountain. You can't pull yourself. It's not like you can just will yourself up it if you've got a serious injury. That would be devastating.
Yeah, and once you get above tree line and those vertical rocks in front of you, you think this wasn't in the plan. It's quite the experience that day, and I found this time going down was tougher than actually going up. I think I had the strength from the previous 90 miles to go up it, but coming down it, I think that tested me probably more than it did going up. How about you?
Yeah, I would say that Katahdin is a difficult hike, whether you're going up or down. Going down can be difficult on, I think more difficult on the joints for sure, the knees. And also if you're somebody who has a fear of heights, I think going down can be more difficult because you have to physically look at the drop, which I think is mentally taxing, where when you're going up, you can ignore whatever's behind you.
Yes, you're right. Now you actually did the trail as a school project, didn't you? Tell us about that and how that came about.
Sure. So yeah, I did that as a school project of sorts, not for any academic credit, but I did get funding through my college, which is St. Lawrence University. And it came about because I wanted to hike the AT. This would have been when I was 18. I decided that I wanted to hike the AT for real, that it wasn't just a dream, and I wanted to try to make it happen.
You're 21 now, aren't you?
Yeah, 21 now.
Yeah. And
so I knew that part of making it a possibility for me to do it was to figure it out financially, because it's as much as you wouldn't expect it to be expensive, traveling for 5 months and living in the woods and buying food and kind of being at the mercy of places that can price gouge you gets pretty expensive being out there.
Yeah, I think most people think it's just not going to cost hardly anything at all, so that they can live cheaper in the woods. But really, there's that old saying, when you're ready to go, you lay out sort of all the gear you want to take and all the money you want to take, and you should take half the gear and twice the money. And that would pretty much sum it up, wouldn't it?
Yeah, totally. I agree 100% with that.
So you're doing the school project, and they were going to fund this. How did you put it to them that you were going to go and be a bum in the woods?
Well, I didn't put it to them like that.
Good idea.
So yeah, like I said, it had to be a school project. So I couldn't just say, I want to go hike the Appalachian Trail, please give me money. I needed some sort of actual project to be doing. So I came up with the idea to do a podcast. I didn't know that there were many other AT podcasts that existed at this point. I didn't know about your podcast, but I've always enjoyed listening to podcasts, and I figured that it would be something that would be possible to do with just my phone out in the woods. So I researched it some, realized that it was a possibility, and then applied for the Tanner Fellowship and for academic student research funding through St. Lawrence and St. Lawrence University. And I received enough funding for them not to cover the trip in full, but to make it feasible for me to cover the rest of it myself.
That was cool. Very cool. And I know I played a very small part in your hike, because you were introduced to me before you started by my friend T-Bird, who I spent a lot of time with in 2014. In fact, who I summited with along with our buddy Leidenot. Tell everybody what was that all about? How that came about. You contacted me through T-Bird.
Sure. And just to kind of contradict something you said, you played a huge part in my pre-trail preparations, because I had no idea how to make a podcast, and you spent hours on FaceTime and Zoom with me before everyone used Zoom. So yeah, I would have been totally lost without you. Anyways, cool. T-Bird is my mom's friend. I'd known her. She was more my mom's friend than my friend. And just like most AT hikers who have finished the trail, most people who have thru hiked are pretty eager and excited to talk to anybody who's planning it. It's something that gets them excited. So as soon as my mom told T-Bird that I was going to be hiking, my mom put us in contact, and my mom and I ended up going over to her house. She only lives about 10 minutes away from me, and her and her husband gave us this presentation. She had a PowerPoint It was,
Oh, she did.
yeah, it was awesome. She had these incredible pictures from her hike, and I mean, I felt I was like a lecture. It was a 2-hour lecture about how to hike the AT, and and then when I told her that I was doing the podcast, she mentioned you, gave me your phone number and email, and then I saw your podcast. It was like a pretty established and well-known AT podcast, and I was like this little 20-year-old who was like, "Hey, I want to do a podcast," and you were, yeah, I can't thank you enough for all your help.
No, it was absolutely my pleasure. Obviously, time anybody would send somebody my way, I try my hardest. It's funny actually. I don't know how you felt about it. Did you find when you were doing the podcast, did you find there was an obligation to record something pretty much every day? And I know you had a bit of a hiatus here, but how did it feel like to be trying to basically keep going on the hike as well as podcasting as well?
I didn't feel obligated to record every day, but I did try my best to record most days. And what I found most effective was to record while I hiked, because it was a nice distraction from hiking. And as a thru hiker, you look for ways to distract yourself from hiking.
Yeah.
And if I told myself I was going to record once I got to camp at night, it just didn't happen, because by the time I cooked dinner, I was in bed. So
do you feel like and I agree with you entirely. I always thought I would be able to do that, get in my tent and comfortably in my tent and then start recording. It was just too darn exhausting, wasn't it?
Totally impossible.
I mean, you get to camp, you think, oh my God, I can't do this. I normally actually podcasted once I went into towns and just had an hour or so to sit down and in a chair and record. So did you enjoy the creative process though in what you were doing?
I did enjoy, I would say most of the time I did enjoy the podcast, especially at the beginning. And then as you sort of mentioned, I took a 2, almost 3-month break from podcasting in the peak of when COVID first started.
Yeah.
And after I got back into it after that, it was a little more difficult for me to enjoy the creative process, I think. And I think it also left me feeling a little bit exposed, because there were still people who weren't in favor of anybody being on trail. And I didn't really censor too much of my emotion and how I was feeling day to day on trail for my podcast, which I got a lot of positive feedback from some listeners about, talking about the really hard times I had out there and how it made it more authentic to listen to, and how when I was doing well, it made that more enjoyable for them to hear. And I was really glad they responded to it like that. But there were parts of it where it's nerve-wracking for me to have my unfiltered emotions just out there for public view.
I know, I do know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. So, but you did the podcast because you were kind of obliged to record it in some way, weren't you, for the college? So why not a YouTube channel as opposed to a podcast?
To be totally honest, I think I didn't want to do all the video editing. I thought it would be a more simple process to do the audio. And I knew that I wasn't going to have a ton of free time to be editing anything that I did. And I've enjoyed public speaking before the AT. I've done some story slam competitions and knew that when I got into the mindset for it, I could do well at public speaking, and video editing and recording wasn't something I had any experience with. So it was kind of just sticking with what I knew.
And you had a terrific intro, but one of the best intros I think I've ever heard for a podcast. Just take us back 20 years ago. What happened before you were born? This is so damn funny. People haven't heard the story. I love this.
Sure. So my parents had some medical complications when they were trying to have children, and because of this, they had a lot of doctor's visits. They ended up in Boston for doctor's visits trying to get pregnant. And during one of those doctor's visits, my mom just kind of turned to my dad and said, "Okay, Mike, if all of this doesn't work and we can't have a kid, let's just go hike the Appalachian Trail together." And fortunately for me, they got pregnant and I am alive. But it is kind of, yeah, it's a great story because it's neither of them. I don't know if either of them had been backpacking before. It wasn't like they were a backpacking couple, but at that point, my mom, even then, was really into the culture of the AT, and her appreciation and curiosity for AT culture has just grown since then. And my dad was a big outdoorsman, so I think she probably could have talked him into it if they weren't able to ever have kids.
Wow. And I know, unfortunately, your father passed when you were only 2. Did your mother ever consider trying to do that with you? And was there ever an option?
No, she likes to hike and she likes to be outdoors, but she, I don't think she's ever really expressed interest in doing a full through hike. It's, I think it's just she knows that she wouldn't enjoy that much exposure outside, and I think honestly for her, she really enjoyed living vicariously through me while I was through hiking, and then being able to meet up and hike some sections of it with me, because she loves the AT, she loves the beauty, she loves the culture, but she also loves hot dinners and a glass of wine and a bed.
Yeah, you don't do too much of that on the AT, do you? Did she? So when you said you wanted to do it, I guess she was really pleased that you made that choice, was she?
Yeah, she definitely was pleased, and she also kind of got to make fun of me and still does, because I hated the AT when I was growing up, because I don't know why I disliked it so much, but she was super into it and she thought it was the coolest thing. And I was just like, Mom, this is weird. I don't know why anyone would do this. You're weird for liking this. And this is up until I'm 16 and then I'm 20 and I'm like, hey Mom, so I'm thinking I might take a semester off from college to go try to through hike the AT. So something changed in there, and she definitely set off.
Very
She
cool.
she lit the fuse that eventually led to me through hiking.
So how did you? Let's talk about the hike itself. So how did you prepare for the hike? Did you ask? You said Pat gave you or T-Bird gave you a PowerPoint presentation. Was there one piece of advice that she gave you that really worked for you or that really stuck to you?
She gave me so much advice that, no, I would say the biggest thing that she narrowed it down to is every ounce counts.
Yeah.
In terms of, she gave me her detailed Excel spreadsheet of all of her gear measured to the gram for some of it.
She's logistically fantastic, isn't she? She's something.
Yeah. So when I saw that, when I was later then looking at my own gear, I thought back to that spreadsheet. So it set the spark in my mind that I need to take my weight seriously before I go in.
So what did you start with? What was the weight?
Full weight with food and water at Amicalola was 33.
That's fine. Yeah, you're a young lad and you're a strong guy anyway, so that should be fine. So when did you actually start then at Amicalola?
Leap year day, February 29th.
Oh, right. So you did start as early as that. So what was it like? I don't recall what the weather was like. Frankly, everybody was, the whole world seems to have gone all over the place this year. So what was it like back then when you started?
It was beautiful. It was
wow.
High 50s, low 60s, partly cloudy and sunny.
Really? Nice. But you must have had some bad weather through some of the journeys, didn't you?
Yeah, definitely had some bad weather, but I will say by the end of the trip, my mom and I were saying to each other that the weather gods must be on my side, because the weather overall was incredible.
Wow.
For me,
you know what?
Year.
You deserved it. Everything else was screwed up.
No, that's the thing that we were totally saying is just, obviously COVID happened and so many things were really difficult that the weather gods, they were looking out, and they made that one aspect of it a lot easier.
Sure. And when you do this, you quickly work out how well your gear is working for you. What was your general impression of the gear you took? Did you choose well?
I did. I was really satisfied with my gear. So my general rule I used when I was researching and then buying my gear was I looked at the most ultralight option and then went one tier heavier, and that's what I got. So I got a hyperlight instead of getting a Z pack, and the quality and the durability of the hyperlight was way higher than people's Z-Packs that I was seeing out there. A lot of people who had Z-Pack packs were not liking them. I hope you're not sponsored by Z-Packs.
Absolutely not sponsored by Z-Packs.
Okay.
I did have a Z-Packs, is it Art Blast, I think? Or
Art Blast.
And I loved it, and it was great.
Okay.
And in fact, funny enough, in those early days last year, I don't know whether that continued. A lot of people I noticed had the Z-Packs duplex, and that seemed to be the tent last year. Was it the same this year or not?
There were a good number of people with the duplex, and the duplex had really high reviews from people I was talking to. So it seems like Z-Packs gear, everything besides their backpack, people seem to be enjoying out there this year.
It is like, because my first backpack when I first went was in 2014 was a Gregory, which I loved, by the way, and had zips everywhere. And it was £5 2 ounces, empty. But the Z-Packs was 19 ounces, and there straight away is a big saving. So what else worked?
So I just talked about my pack. I had the Hyperlite Wind Rider 3 3400, and then for my tent I had the Big Agnes Copper Spur 2-person. So that is a freestanding tent, so it has the full pole framing, so you can put it up anywhere. You don't have to worry about staking out certain parts of it, which I really enjoyed. That's very
useful in the north, particularly, isn't it, with the tented platforms as well. I saw that quite a few times as well. Did you enjoy that?
I loved that tent.
And did you change out gear? Send home some gear when it got warmer?
Yeah, but nothing major. Mostly just clothing.
Yeah, that's what I would do as well. So then COVID happened. You started February 29th. It started getting worse and worse, I guess, through March and that. How did you come to the decision to stay on trail?
Mostly through conversations with my mom. She, I felt like I kind of gave her, I told her, Mom, if you want me to come home, I'm more than happy to come home. I'm sure you're probably worried about me being in the woods in North Carolina. I'm from New York State. But she was super resilient, and we basically sat down. I mean, we didn't physically sit down together, but on the phone, we talked about the facts of what was known about coronavirus at that time. We talked about the state policies that were being put in place. We talked about how I could try to keep myself safe and keep other people safe. And we, instead of just looking at the big news headlines of worst pandemic ever, everything's crumbling, run and hide, go home forever, we looked at the actual scientific information that was known about coronavirus.
Oh, it's a novelty.
Yeah. So we did using some independent thought. We looked at the facts of COVID, realized that we thought there was a way that I could keep hiking and keep myself safe and keep other people safe while continuing on the trail. And we just evaluated that decision pretty much weekly based on the new information that would come out. And it never got to a point where we felt like I needed to leave trail.
And what was it like in town with the locals? But did you get any problems, or did you stay more in the woods than going to town?
So I never had any negative interactions with any townspeople. Anybody who chose to interact with me was friendly, or kind of, I had no unfriendly interactions. And in terms of staying in the woods, I don't think we probably spent less time in towns, in terms of we didn't take any 0 days in towns because it was uncomfortable to be in town. Definitely wearing the backpack through town down south was a mark of shame, which is crazy because I'm being totally serious. I wished I could have hid my pack somewhere and tried to blend in, but I mean, I had a pair of yellow Crocs as my town shoes, so even without the pack, I was still pretty identifiable.
Yeah, always a good look. Always a good look. Yeah.
Yeah. So the crazy thing is, usually on a normal through hike year, I'd assume when you're going into town, you have this overwhelming sense of relief and excitement. And this year, that feeling came when I was leaving town to go back into the woods.
Oh, how interesting. I'm not, I think you've had a unique experience from through hikers in the past. And part of it is the enjoyment, for me anyway, of being in town and getting this warmth you get from people in town. I'd imagine there was no hitching either, was there? What a nightmare that must be.
Yeah, we definitely did some road walks into towns. I can't remember. I don't know if we ever did more than like a 4-mile road walk one way. And the hitching definitely slowed down, but we did have success from pickup trucks. People would still let us into the bed of their pickup trucks,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I wasn't inside somebody else's
No.
car from basically Georgia until the north.
But there's something pretty damn cool, isn't it? Being on the flat back of a flatbed. I mean, it's
Oh
fantastic. I
yeah,
love
yeah,
it.
totally, totally.
It really is.
We got a hitch into
Especially when you're an old guy
Franklin.
like me. I mean, the young guy is just kind of, who cares? But with an old guy, it's pretty damn cool, let me tell you. So what about other hikers? Was there a kind of screw 'em mentality, us against the world, or did you not meet that many other through hikers?
I would say it wasn't an us against the world mentality, but I think the through hikers that did stay out there were much closer with one another this year because we were all trying to navigate this entirely new situation together.
Sure.
So I can't say that we were more bonded than hikers on a normal year, because one of the great things about the AT is it brings strangers super close together really quickly.
Yeah.
So all I can say is that definitely happened this year, and I'm super
sure.
thankful for that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And a friend of yours did actually join you at Hiawassee, I believe. Who was that?
Yeah, so that was Ellie Obrink.
Okay. And what was the original plan to hike with Ellie?
She was going to come. The plan was she was going to meet me in Hiawassee and hike for a week and then go home from the NOC. So that's about 60 miles in 7 days that we did.
Right.
And yeah, so we split at the NOC, and she thought she was flying home to Maine the next day. And then she got a call saying that her upcoming semester was canceled she was going to do this Wild Rockies Field Institute program, which I believe is out in Utah. I think I'm correct saying that. And that got canceled because of COVID. So she was now in North Carolina with nothing to do for the next couple of months. And
Good Lord.
and the world was shutting down.
With a backpack?
With a backpack. And
a buddy of hers. So she was just a friend of yours, wasn't she?
Yeah, we were just friends at the time.
Yeah, and it's at the time that made the difference, I suspect. She carried on a bit with you, didn't she? So, no, that sounds terrible. So I'll rephrase that. She carried on the hike with you a bit. Is that right?
Correct. So we actually ended up hiking a total of 1,000 miles together from northern Georgia to southern Pennsylvania. And yeah, in that time, friend went to girlfriend.
You know, I still don't understand how that happens. I find that quite remarkable. But yeah, great, that's fantastic. So so it's funny how the serendipity of the trail does it again. You know, she was going to go, so I suspect had she gone at the NOC, that wouldn't have, unless it had developed already. But it would have been, that probably wouldn't have happened, would it?
Totally, I don't think it would have. We were friends through and through for the entire first week when we said goodbye at the NOC. Oh. Nothing more than that at the time. And a few weeks later, when we were looking back at that, we were saying that had that been a movie, it would have been cliche how everything happened, because we said goodbye at the NOC. We both split. I kept going north on the AT. She stayed there. She was flying out the next morning, and at 10 o'clock the night before, 10 o'clock p.m., she got a phone call saying that the Wild Rockies Field Institute was canceled.
Absolutely amazing. But then she did get off after 1,000 miles. That was to go to a job, wasn't it? How did she feel about that? Or would she like to have carried on to the end?
So yeah, she got off to go work she works now at a oyster farm off the coast of Maine. Wow. And I don't know if so we had some pretty honest conversations about it, and I was open in telling her that, I had gone out onto the AT to have some of a solo hiking and a solitude experience. And sure. She really respected that and wanted to give me the second half of the hike to have that sort of formative experience that I had gone out seeking. And yeah, I'm incredibly appreciative of her for that. And I know that she wants to complete a section hike. So I don't know. You'd have to ask her if she wanted to keep going from there or not. But I think after 1,000 miles, when she had only been planning on being out there for 7 days and it had now been 3 months, part of her was definitely ready to go home.
Yeah, and if it gave you the opportunity to do what you'd come there for, that's a good thing. But when we spoke about this before, and this obviously couldn't have been too much longer after that, you told me that you'd had enough around Connecticut and Massachusetts. What was happening then?
Okay, yeah. So once I had continued on the hike solo for the second half, once I got into Connecticut and Massachusetts, I guess the way that I've phrased it to some other people is you could tell me that I have to do my favorite thing in life every single day, and after 4 months, I'd probably be really sick of doing it. Like, you could tell me I have to eat pizza and ride roller coasters every single day, and if I started now, by the time it was February, I would not want to walk into an amusement park.
That is not the same thing, and you know it.
Yeah, well, no, because I love hiking. I loved hiking before going into the AT,
Yeah.
and it was just, no matter how much I was enjoying hiking, I had just been doing it for so long that I'd lost my motivation to want to keep hiking for sure.
So why did you keep hiking?
Because I'd set out with a goal to complete the AT, and I felt some obligation because of the podcast, and I had some people who'd been following me through the podcast. And another huge reason that people don't get on other years that I had this year, and some of the people I was hiking with had this year, a motivator to continue, is if we had gotten off trail to go back home, we were going back to quarantine.
There is that, of course.
So
you probably felt safer out there, and whatever you were going back to wasn't any good anyway, was it?
It definitely was a different world we were going back to, and we knew eventually we were going to have to go back to that world. But there was a sense of freedom from the coronavirus panic on the AT. And
was it a conversation with your mum that's kept you going, or because we didn't actually talk about it? But I mean, did you have that conversation that you were getting fed up, or did you make that decision without needing to refer to her?
No, I talked to her a couple times a week, every week for the entire thing, and she knew where my headspace was for the whole thing. And when I hit my lowest low, I was in Vermont, and I was staying for four days, getting shuttled back and forth to the trail from my mom. We were staying at my freshman year of college roommate lives 4 miles off trail, and so we were staying with him and his mom. And between my mom and his mom, I got just like a double dose of mom motivation and encouragement. And I mean, I was
you can't resist that. You can't resist a double dose of mum motivation.
I was so ready to be done with the trail at that point, but they motivated me and kind of nursed me back to physical health with a lot of good dinners.
Cool.
So
cool.
Yeah, big thanks there.
So you then hit New Hampshire and Maine, which I think you'll probably agree is about the best parts of the trail. Didn't you think so?
Totally. View wise.
And did you feel revitalized as a result of those conversations and ready to embrace and enjoy those last 2 states?
No, I felt motivated to keep going. But I'm not. I would be lying if I told you I was excited to hike many of the last days. Once I was in my last week of hiking, after I'd been to Shaw's and Monson and was into the 100-mile wilderness, I was able to have some days where I was like, this is pretty fun. But Massachusetts to halfway through Maine, most days I was not excited to be doing what I was doing.
But eventually you touched that brown sign and it was over. And I'm sure you were relieved when it was over and you went back home and so on. Have you, in that month you've been away, because you said before you'd never do it again, I mean, have you missed the trail? Have you been, how's it affected you?
I've had moments where I've missed the experiences I had out there and the people that I met out there. I haven't had a moment yet where I would rather be out through hiking than be at my house.
All right.
It certainly has affected me in making me appreciate good food and a warm bed and the comfort and ease of modern life a lot more. But I think I'm kind of unique in the sense that through hiking the AT isn't the most isolating wilderness experience I've had in my life. I had a full semester at college my sophomore year where I lived in a yurt in the Adirondacks for 3 months with no laptop or cell phone.
Cool.
And after that experience, when I was coming back to society, I was totally wrecked. Super just felt entirely out of place. Couldn't really handle much of anything. So then after the AT, when I was traveling, so it's not like I was getting attached to one place, and I was meeting a lot of people, and I had my phone and I had service almost every day. So I wasn't totally removed from the world. My transition back to society after the Adirondack semester really prepared me for the AT transition. So I don't think the post-trail depression really hit me like it hits a lot of people.
That is so cool. You seem a very mature 20-year-old. I don't want to sound patronizing. You seem to have a mature approach to it, and you're honest with yourself with what it was like, So, I mean, I think I know the answer to this. Do you think you'll ever do another long distance trail?
Maybe. I would need.
That's a definite maybe then.
Yeah. I need a year or more to just process and reflect on the AT hike. And if I were to attempt another long distance trail, PCT, CDT, something else, I would, before going into, when I was planning it, I would need to plan in like ways to be happy and to enjoy it while I'm out there, not just planning my gear and when I'm going to be where. Because if I'm going to have another long distance hike, I would just want to be physically and mentally healthier than this past one. And
did you lose much weight then?
No, I didn't lose too much. So my preparation before I left, I was eating as many calories as I could every day for a month. And after doing that, I peaked at 185. Wow. But my real weight was probably like 180 tops. And I finished at about 162. So I lost.
Wow, you did well.
Yeah, 20 pounds maybe. I carried a lot of food. I carried a heavy pack so I could eat a lot of food.
Right. And now just one last question, or two last questions actually. So what does your mum think about it that you've done? Is she terribly proud and telling everybody what you've done?
Yeah, yes, she is. And she definitely is proud of me, but I think my mom and my relationship is, she's not the type of mom to like take me around and brag about me, and I wouldn't want her to do that. So I'm very happy to have her support and have her admiration for what I've done, but I also don't feel like a showpiece by any means that she's bragging to her friends about. Her approach to life is just, things happen and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not. And this was one of the good things. Very
cool. That is very cool. So where can people listen to your podcast? Because you've updated it now, haven't you? You're up to date?
Yeah, I'm up to date on the podcast. Hoping to have some more interviews from other people I've met on trail this hike. So yeah, the show's called Walking and Talking, an Appalachian Trail Thru-Hike, and it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. You can find the Facebook page is at Walking Talking Pod, and the website for everything is just my name, ryanschlosser.com, and that has links to listen to everything. So
that's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool. Well, look, I'm so pleased that what started as a conversation about how to make a podcast a couple of months ago has ended with you doing something which I know you're going to process for a long time to come. You'll be surprised how you keep getting different thoughts about this. So I really appreciate you coming on the show, Ryan, and congratulations, by the way.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the help.
Not at all. You take it easy, all right?
Yeah, you as well.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
That sound wasn't too disastrous, was it? Ryan sounded fine though, so that's really what mattered. If you want to hear the story of his hike, remember it's at Walking and Talking, an Appalachian Trail Thru-Hike. I thought it was interesting that he seemed reticent to really embrace the trail, though, of course, this isn't for everybody. I thought his determination to finish in the end was impressive, though, because when you get down, And indeed, when you get up on the trail, these emotions are heightened and decisions can be made in the heat of that emotion that you may well regret later. Ryan kept going, kept podcasting, and eventually he got the opportunity to stand at the brown sign on Katahdin. And believe me, that does not suck. I know that there are arguments on both sides as to whether or not hikers should have been out on the trail this year. My feeling is that I'm going to cover them because, well, they are on the trail. My guest next week is going to be Sandy Mara, President and CEO of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and we'll be talking about the decisions that the ATC made during the earlier part of the year. I'm looking forward to recording her responses. Now, let's catch up with Bill Tickner, or Mr. President. Here's Bill. Well, we're on with Bill again. Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm good, Blue. How are you?
Well, a little stressed trying to get things done. I've not been as efficient as I would like to be, but I think we're working out now. And we were supposed to speak a day or two ago when you were going to be having lunch in Unionville, when you would go back into New York, because you'd actually left New York by then, hadn't you? Did you go into Unionville?
Yeah.
We didn't get a chance to speak, but did you go back into Unionville?
I ended up going back in, yeah. I had a fraternity brother come visit, and
Nice.
I actually hiked past Unionville, and he picked me up and brought me back for lunch, which was great.
Yeah, can't beat it. It's a really great stop, actually, Unionville. I know that when I've been there both times, you can stop and camp. I don't know whether you can now. I don't know whether you can this year, but we camped in the local park. Could you do that or not?
I'm not sure. I didn't check that, but I did definitely have a great meal at the Wits End Tavern.
Nice.
It was great.
Very nice. And also, one of our listeners, Eric, reached out to you. Did you manage to meet Eric for a beer?
I reached back out to him, but I was already too far, I think, for him to meet up. Yeah, but it was great that he even offered.
You're now through New York, aren't you? You're now into Jersey. So how's it been this last week? What have you been doing?
It's been great. I've been making good progress. I'm about 130 miles from when we last talked in Pauling. So I'm actually almost to Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Yeah.
Something to look forward to.
What?
Something to really look forward to.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I know. I've been hearing all about Rocksylvania.
Yeah, you're gonna love it. I mean, people do say they dislike it, but really it's just such a challenge. It's a challenge on the ankles. It's a challenge on everything because it's constant walking over rocks for about 80 miles or 100 miles, whatever it is. But, hopefully you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah. And, I've had the same shoes all this entire time from Katahdin. They have about 870 miles on them. Wow. So I have a new set coming today. Yeah. I'm very excited about that.
My guess
ready
is
for the rocks.
Yeah, my guess is you'll definitely need them. So what do you think of New York? I know that last year a lot of people found it really difficult, and we were in New York in a lot of rain. How's that been for you? Because if you remember, some of those rocks are quite smooth, but they're curved, and when they get wet, they can get really slick.
Yeah, I only had 2 days of rain in New York, and I did kind of lower miles those days.
Right.
But it wasn't too bad. There was a lot of blowdowns that they haven't cleared yet. So that was a bit of a challenge, and a lot of folks are talking about that this year. I imagine, with COVID and everything, maybe it's delaying some of that work.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah, but other than that, though, I mean, crossing the Hudson was really cool on the bridge, and hiking up Bear Mountain. The views are just absolutely gorgeous.
Isn't Bear Mountain extraordinary? Those stairs. And we actually talked to somebody in last week's show, a guy called Dave Fleischman, who was he helped do some of the work on Bear Mountain. And you think the amount of man hours that must have gone in there to make our climb easier. It really makes you, it puts in perspective what people are doing for you, doesn't it?
It really does. I can't imagine. There's so many of these large stone, chunks turned to steps, and the whole way up, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And then I can't come.
And down as well.
Go ahead.
It's a long way down, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, of course, I was going north, so you're going the other way. So, yes, your climb up was all steps, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. The climb up going south is actually quite easy. So I had nothing to complain about.
Oh, nice. And you discovered the delis, no doubt?
So many sandwiches, Lou.
Why would you not? Why would you not?
I know. Well, I think I've gained 5 pounds in this section. And I actually I had a package that didn't make it, unfortunately, because the hotel I was sending it to has closed down since I checked in June, unfortunately.
Wow.
But fortunately, I have enough extra dinners that I didn't really need that package. So
Cool.
It kind of worked out.
Yeah, that's good. Did you stay at the monastery, the Greymore Monastery?
I did not. No.
But you did go for a drive-in, apparently. What's that all about?
Oh, yeah. So the trail goes by, after you cross into New Jersey, the trail kind of goes back and forth from New Jersey to New York a couple times.
Right.
And it gets really close to this town called Warwick.
Right.
And they have this drive-in theater called, the Warwick Drive-In Theater. And there's a guy named Poppy there who works there, who is amazing. And he lets hikers come and camp near the drive-in. And you get to watch the movies for free. They give you these radios that usually cost $5, but they give them for free for hikers. So you can actually hear the audio.
Oh, cool.
And there's concession stands, and it's amazing. And I was able to get there early enough that before the movie started, I went to this orchard literally across the street, and had some cider and pizza on this kind of orchard farm. It was a really nice stop.
It's those experiences. Yes, it's those experiences that you don't really think of, do you? But when they happen, you really appreciate them when they're happening, don't you?
Oh yeah. It's just, well, I can't remember the last time I saw a movie, in a theater.
Yes.
For obvious reasons.
Yes.
And to actually have popcorn and I watched Bill and Ted Face the Music, which is just mindless, mindless comedy. It was great.
It's a movie. It's a movie. It's great to go back to the movies, I'm sure. And of course I must admit, I think I did this first time, but last year you saw the city skyline from about 40 miles off, isn't it? I think it's about 40 miles where you can see New York City.
Yeah, it's right before you cross into New Jersey for the first time going south. And they have an American flag kind of, put up there on the hill. And if you look, I happen to get a clear day, luckily.
Right.
You can see all the buildings, popped up over the hillsides, really far off in the distance. But it was a treat. It was really cool.
So, have you been with anybody, or are you by yourself again? What are you doing now?
I did meet a guy named Hopper at the drive-in, and we hiked a couple days together. But it's been great to have my fraternity brother Roy from 20 years ago.
Wow.
He lives in Jersey, so he's come a couple times to support me along this section. And it was pretty amazing because Roy helped me move all the way across country 20 years ago when I moved to California.
Uh-huh.
And my mom had given me this gift, it's a little going away gift, and I couldn't hang on to it, so I'd given it to Roy to hang on to. I forgot all about it, and it's a little emotional because my mom passed away last year while I was on trail.
Okay.
I did get a chance to fly back and be with her in the end, but Roy picked me up the other day, and he gave me this package, and I look at it, and I knew instantly it was from my mom.
Oh my
because it was. I mean, it was a moment where I got to, kind of have mom on the trail for a minute,
Yes, totally understand. Totally understand.
Yeah. And only someone like Roy could have done that, it was really nice to have a visitor like that. And
you know what? I funny enough, I've just been writing the notes for today's show, and I mentioned in it that I think that emotions are heightened out on the trail, good and bad. You can make good and bad decisions based upon the highs and lows that are out on the trail. And I think that the trail itself exacerbates all those emotions, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think part of it is you're tired all the time.
Yes.
And when I'm tired, I'm definitely more emotional in general.
Hence the expression tired and emotional. In England, tired and emotional means, tired and emotional in England means pissed. I mean, pissed drunk. That's what tired and emotional means.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, dear. Well, look, I'm glad you're enjoying yourself still. Is your weather this year better than most years? Because I am hearing that most people have got that decent or relatively decent weather most of the time this year. How's it been for you since you started?
I would say it's been great in general if I were to summarize it, but I've only had maybe, I don't know, 5 days of rain,
Wow.
where it was like raining all day,
Yeah.
which is not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all.
For me, though, I don't really mind a little bit of rain. I feel like I would have minded if it was like many days in a row, which I know happens sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But that hasn't really happened.
Cool.
What really bothers me is when it gets too hot. So
Yeah.
I think that's why Massachusetts was and really Connecticut was pretty hard for me, because there were a few days in the 90s that just were a slog.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
But it's kind of coming down. It's in the 80s and upper 70s now, and I'm seeing little signs of fall coming in, like a red leaf here, a few yellow leaves there. I'm seeing posts from friends that I've met that are going northbound who are in New Hampshire, and the leaves are already changing there. So
yeah, cool. You're going to see
kind
that.
of interesting.
Yeah, you're going to see that soon. That'd be very cool. Yeah. Well, look, great to catch up. I'm looking forward to hearing your impression of Pennsylvania, because by going south, as soon as you get into Pennsylvania, you're going to hit these horrendous rocks. But enjoy it.
Great, thanks, Steve. First, you were like, "Oh, Connecticut's going to be really hard."
It's going to be fun.
Thanks for the warning.
It's going to be fun. Make sure use your new shoes. You will wear those in, and just watch your ankles. You walk at an angle a lot, so just watch your ankles. That's all.
Yeah, I will. Thanks for the advice.
Yeah. Okay, mate. We'll take it easy, and we'll speak next week. Okay.
All right. Take care, Blue.
Cheers, then. Bye. I must say I'm impressed with how much more than just the trail that Bill is trying to see. He's made the time to do non-trail stuff like a drive-in movie, and to meet up with friends and family. That gift from his mum, even though she's passed, must have been very, very special. So now, Pennsylvania and the rocks. Believe me, he'll be glad he bought those new shoes. You don't want the constant pressure of Pennsylvania's rocks under your feet with worn tread on your shoes. Nightmare. Before we get on to Fuzzy and the Wapiti shelter, I want to thank my wonderful patrons who donate to the show. This week, Alan Hansen stepped up, and Lisa Rana and Terry Stewart maintained their monthly donation to help keep the show going. Remember, you can join them by going to the hikingradionetwork.com site, and on any of the show pages, click on the donate button, and you can sign up for a one-off payment or a monthly donation through either your PayPal account or a credit card. Thank you so much for all the kind support. Finally today, Fuzzy has reached Wapiti Shelter with all its dark history. I'll see you next week. Chapter 7. The Wapiti Shelter Murders. May the 9th to May the 16th, mile 523 to 620. Infatuated by the prospect of pizza, I sped along a gentle trail towards the partnership shelter before stopping mid-stride, alarmed at the cacophony behind. I was hesitant to look, afraid of the deafening roar. Cautiously, I turned as a rainstorm came right at me. Panicking, I reached for the side pocket where I kept my poncho and umbrella. They both snagged on the pack straps as I tugged desperately. So heavy was the downpour, it appeared like a waterfall closing on me with frightening speed. Shit, Fuzzy! Do something and make it quick! Of the limited options available, I ran. Sprinting through the woods, I laughed at my crazy plan and ridiculed myself. What are you doing? You can't outrun a storm! I fled like a frightened hiker fleeing a rampaging bear. I jumped over tree roots, leapt for boulders before springing into mid-air and landing, sliding along the slick ground. I flicked my head around to check on headway. Oh crap, run faster! Run, you bloody idiot, run! I giggled like a child, laughing at the absurdity. Exhausted, I couldn't continue and the madness caught me. Collapsing in a heap of sweat and gasping for air, I watched the wave race closer, as a surfer might study a breaker, and I braced myself. The wind hit first, almost knocking me over. Then the torrent engulfed me, passing within a minute. I sat there soaked, intoxicated by the sheer energy of the elements. Walking is natural, requiring little concentration. This means we can think to where thoughts become novelties. In our everyday lives, we have less thinking time because we're busy with other tasks. When walking, we become lost in our heads, reaching meditation. We studied topics in depth. Instead of brief minutes solving problems before interruptions, I spent days pondering various issues, and not boring issues such as finances or work, but a host of diverse areas as simple, even, as the rain. And boy, did it rain out there. Once my legs warmed, my mind drifted. I pondered how lucky I was to be through hiking. Would dinner be rice or pasta? Would I camp or sleep in a shelter? Often I studied the weather, or as I called it, precipitation observation studies. It wasn't boredom, far from it. With a simplified life, our imagination explores subjects that we usually considered mundane. Even areas we perceived as unworthy of our attention proved fruitful. Light rain showers were rare, but torrential downpours common. We'd been lucky. The first 2 weeks were warm, with a few brief storms. In the woods, it was difficult to see the sky for clues. Glimpsing gloomy clouds or overcast skies through the foliage, I used my other senses. Stronger winds suggested a storm approaching, and a temperature drop confirmed the assumption. There was another sense which I couldn't put my finger on, a primeval instinct. This was the alert stage. If I felt rain, I moved to red alert stage. I stopped and listened. Sound often gave away nature's intentions. If the leaves rustled, then I had to decide. Should I don my waterproofs, or did I kid myself that I didn't need to bother? As simple as wearing waterproofs sounds, most hikers postponed it as long as possible. It interrupted our rhythm and took time to both put gear on and remove it. Droplets flattened, increased in frequency, and reluctantly I stopped to prepare. I often misjudged the rain, and all hell broke loose during the waterproofing process. Appalachian storms were deafening, thunder roared, and fierce winds whipped through the woods. The path transformed into a torrent, gushing along the trail. When the deluge finally abated, I stayed beneath the umbrella as water continued dripping from the trees. The birds offered final confirmation the storm had passed as they left their shelters and sang once more. Apart from gauging the storms, I observed the rain itself. Its temperature was often cold during the tail end of winter, especially at higher elevations. My poncho only covered my torso, so exposed skin numbed in minutes. Goose pimples speckled my arms, and my hands ceased to function. However, later, in the heat of summer, we welcomed the showers as they cooled us. Velocity also came into play. At one end of the spectrum, fine mists settled on my face, the droplets collecting in my beard. At the other end were angry torrents, so heavy we surrendered to the deluge, and resistance was futile. Keeping dry was impossible in intense Appalachian storms. Instead, we fled for the nearest shelter. Weather fronts usually rolled in from the west before the woods tempered the downpours, sheltering us. In the open spaces, such as meadows, the rain came from many directions. I braced the umbrella against me, protecting against the near-horizontal pounding. With headwinds, there was little I could do because the umbrella obscured my view, so I held it aloft to check my footing. Often, for fun, I didn't bother protecting myself, and hiked in my shorts and T-shirt for the novelty of a soaking. In hot weather, soaked clothing was perfect air conditioning. The weather followed similar patterns. I learned what to expect and became wiser for it. Thankfully, save days when it rained for hours, the storms eventually passed over and I dried out. I loved the aftermath of storms, the freshness and the spring cleaning of the woods. I could almost taste the petrichor. I reached the partnership shelter, chatted briefly to Tyvek, and continued to the Mountain Rogers Visitor Centre. Snotrocket and Anchor looked forlorn as the pizza delivery service weren't answering their phone. I called Dinosaur. "I'm at the Visitor Centre." "Okay, on my way," she replied. Dinosaur hiked the AT in 2006, and I'd met her on the PCT in 2010 with Swayze, her partner. Our paths crossed many times on the journey. She chatted freely, and her infectious personality was addictive. She had a small budget for the AT and had to borrow her dad's 40-year-old Coate backpack as she couldn't afford one. It lasted 600 miles and several repairs before failing. She called it her Dinosaur and took the name for herself. A true outdoors lover, she carried this passion to her work as a member of the Connecticut Trail crew based at Sugar Grove. They worked in the Grayson Highlands but cooperated with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and the U.S. Forest Service, looking after trail sections from Rockfish Gap near Waynesboro, Virginia, to Springer Mountain itself. She'd suggested food and lodging in exchange for work. Connecticut hosted volunteers most weeks, who gave a week of their time to maintain the AT. She arrived in an aging 93 Toyota Corolla, which squeaked around corners. We stopped at a sandwich bar to solve my hunger crisis before arriving at Connecticut, where the boss, Dave Hebert, also known as the Tsar, introduced himself. Long-distance trails need preserving. They're subject to constant wear from hikers and the weather. Upkeep involves repairing the high-traffic sections and protection from the elements. Water follows the easiest route and often drains on the path itself. Wooden or stone water bars, barriers, divert the flow off trail. Steps protect the surface in popular areas such as trailheads. Undergrowth needs clearing, fallen trees removing, and there's a host of other challenges to contend with. It's a continual battle to keep the AT open, and a dedicated band of maintenance crews working long hours in all conditions toil admirably. I looked forward to returning the favour. We worked for 2 days in the Grayson Highlands on a steep section suffering from erosion. We constructed steps from heavy boulders utilised from close by. It was hard work. The logistics and sheer physical effort required to move those beasts was huge. We excavated holes by eye according to the boulder size and, using straps and several volunteers, hauled it in brief bursts. We filled each hole to stabilise the stone before moving to the next one. With 12 of us taking a day to install 2 steps, I realised how much work the AT needed. At day's end, they rewarded our exhausting work with food. During the day, Dave dealt with the clerical side at base camp and cooked a feast morning and evening. A queue wound patiently through the kitchen, and with dangerous appetites we edged closer to the pile of food. We licked lips as our stomachs rumbled and excitement grew. Cradling generous portions, we retired to the canteen to placate our hungers. Thru-hikers voiced their appreciation in passing trail maintenance, and after my time at Conorock, my respect increased for those working on the AT. My hat goes off to Dinosaur, Dave and the crew, and all the teams who toil tirelessly. Way to go. It's rare during my life off trail, working my job, that I woke smiling. Pondering another mundane day, I struggled from bed. On trail, once the sun woke me, I smiled. I savoured lying there, listening to the birds and watching the sunlight dance on the canvas. I ventured inside the Lindemont School, part of a settlement built in 1894, and viewed a bygone era. Lord Horatio Farnsworth had left a message in the visitor's book, and, having researched his title, signed off as Lord Horatio Farnsworth Belvedere Bentley Tiberius III, Esquire. I giggled for the rest of the day, wondering whether he'd finished tweaking it. I left the school, meandering through a meadow, one of several dotting Virginia. A flattened line of grass marks the way. I often caught tantalising glimpses of these open spaces from the hills above. I spotted farms, quiet roads and isolated houses. There were audible clues too. The distant hum of a tractor, a mower, dogs barking, livestock, or a car bouncing along a narrow country lane. We missed what lurked below before descending to join that familiar place. I planned on 20-mile days to get to Petersburg. There I hoped to catch a ride to Damascus and trail days. I passed Pops and Apollo sheltering from the fierce sun under a giant oak tree. They invited me over, and as I lay against my pack, I gladly accepted a chilled beer from their recent resupply. We felt no urge to move in the intense heat, and I savoured my drink. We stayed for 2 hours, relaxing, catching the trail gossip, watching birds soar and enjoying a quiet afternoon in a meadow. That unassuming rest highlighted my hike. After the planning, the expectation, the physical challenge and the spiritual growth, drinking beer with friends in the middle of a Virginian summer summed up my adventure. I still reflect and smile. We respected Pops, 53 years old with long grey hair tied into a ponytail. His beard reached his chest and the life outdoors had tanned him. His lean frame suggested good fitness, and he often held court in conversations, offering insightful views wisely. We listened intently when he spoke. Everyone loved him. After returning home from America, I watched a film called Hard Way Home by Corey Rocket Fina and realised how wise Pops was. She had filmed him several times, and one shared nugget of his wisdom had me nodding in agreement. And those great souls who have learnt to let go, out here like us, we let go, we put on packs, we hike in mountains. We've let go of the TV, the illusions, the jobs, the insurance, and these other concepts holding us into this man-made world, instead of being lifted into God's creation in this life we have. So let go. The weather reports didn't bode well. I'd camped, short of my 20-mile target, and as my coffee brewed, I grabbed handfuls of granola. I watched the world wake. A stream gurgled to my side, weaving around rhododendron bushes, its sandy bottom visible through its clear waters. The woods were silent, save the birds heralding another day, and a weak mist floated past like a fleeting ghost. I'd earmarked Chestnut Knob shelter to avoid the forecast rain. Despite its meagre capacity, I figured arriving mid-afternoon would secure a place. AWOL's guide promised not only walls but a door as well. Time spent outdoors reminds us how little we need for contentment. Case in point, spending the night with the bonus of 4 walls and a door excited me. Life couldn't have been simpler. With 18 miles to Chestnut Knob, I had 4,500 feet of climbing. A cloudless sky and piercing sun belied the weather forecast. I followed blazes painted on posts, sentinels pointing the way. The overnight dew coating the grass soaked my shoes. Virginia undulated, somewhat easier than the previous states, and although boasting big mountains, I found descending easier. I clambered over wooden stiles and crossed potholed country roads. Deer bounded away as I startled them, and cows eyed me curiously. Come on, you must have seen a thru-hiker before. I longed for the shaded woods when in the sun and anticipated the heat when in the shade. On many hills I looked back at where I'd travelled. The best views were often behind, and I might never see them again. Then I turned away, held the image, stored it somewhere safe, and continued towards Maine. Previous thru-hikers, Lumberjack and Labrat, had left trail magic, so I rested. 2 coolers excited me on another sweltering day, and I longed for a sweet drink. Anything else was a bonus. Sure enough, one brimmed with soda, and I unashamedly took the last cold Coke, peering inside the other. Joy of joys, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. A note detailed the weather report, confirming rain was on the way. The appropriate named Thirsty arrived, who I'd met at the Fontana Hilton. He earned his trail name as he opened another can. We spent 15 minutes belching and laughing at our timely fortune. He left first and stayed half a mile ahead as we finished the 4 miles to Chestnut Knob. A pond signalled our water source, but a queue had formed. More hikers approached, and concerned of missing a place, I found another pool in the undergrowth. By the time I'd filled my bag, I'd jumped several places in the bed pecking order. Chestnut Knob shelter sat in a clearing commanding fine views. I secured a bottom bunk near the door as a steady stream of hikers dribbled in, and the place brimmed. The recommended capacity of 8 increased to 20. Far from being cramped, we respected the space. Some sat on their bunks, cooking their dinner, writing their journals and other tasks, while Pops made hot chocolate with bourbon for us. Laughter filled the air with animated conversation, and cheer echoed. As we succumbed to tired limbs, Chestnut Knob quietened until the last light vanished and Pops blessed us. Good night, my friends. Be safe and God bless you. I love you all. You hear? I love you all. Night, Pops. I left Chestnut Knob into a murky, damp world. A mist hung low, and only intermittent rain disturbed an eerie morning stillness. I skidded along a slick trail onto a dirt track near the VA 623. Thirsty, Ambassador, and Flint huddled under the trees trying to roll cigarettes. I nodded a greeting and, keen to stay warm, continued. I thought I heard a cry from behind and stopped. Fuzzy! I had. It was Thirsty. Hey, Fuzzy! I cut my hand around my mouth. Yeah, what's up? A guy called Bush Goggles is ahead. We're going to stay at a church place to dry out. Tell him we won't make camp tonight. I understood, but misheard the name. Who? Bush Goggles, he cried. Okay, I'll tell him. 4 miles later, I called him at the Jenkins shelter. He sat on the edge of the deck, swinging his legs like a bored kid. I rested too, keen to escape the damp. Hey, I'm guessing you're Bush Goggles. He smiled cheekily. Yep, sure am. I've a message from Thirsty. He's staying at the church tonight. Oh, okay, thanks. Where you heading? I checked the guidebook. Helvis Mills Shelter looks perfect for my mileage. Dallas Bush Goggles Nussvold was 23 and came from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He grinned mischievously as though he'd pranked someone. His trail name came after he'd cast admiring glances at a member of the fairer sex in Gatlinburg. She turned around and wasn't as attractive as he thought. Trevelyan, Walkabout Edwards, an Australian hiker, chastised him. "'Struth, mate, you got your bush goggles on." This is Australian slang for a misjudged attraction to someone caused by isolation, such as working in a mine or, in this case, too long spent in the woods. He was young, in great shape and eager to cover distance. Walking above my normal pace, it was like staying with a pacemaker. I managed, but it was a decent workout. His official employment title was an environmental and contractor site superintendent. This proved a mouthful, so to simplify, I refer to him as the builder. Chairs 11, Deep, and others spread about Helvis Mill Shelter. Bush Goggles' tent, a bright yellow model, was unusual. With the entrance on the roof instead of crawling in the side, he stepped in the top. Wet gear hung from most hooks in the shelter. Eager to visit the privy, I discovered it was roofless, so I returned to retrieve my umbrella. I had several unique experiences on the AT, but sitting on the loo under my umbrella in the rain was a first. I planned to return to Damascus Trail Days for a weekend, so to compensate for the distance deficit I'd incur, I completed 2 25-mile days. I passed the 600-mile mark and ventured into the fourth state of Virginia. Our plan had worked. I'd not suffered with blisters and increased my fitness. My legs felt tough, my mind stable, and despite the difficult hills, I hiked confidently. Daffy had fallen behind again, though Ches 11 had seen his messages in the trail registers, suggesting he was close. PJ had disappeared, and I hadn't seen Lasagna for 2 days. When I checked my email, a message from him solved everyone's whereabouts. They were in Bland. PJ had a stress fracture in his foot. I hoped he'd be okay, but I knew he had a problem. Injuries can end through hikes. We're a stubborn bunch and usually ignore doctors' warnings, on the rare occasions we bother seeing one. Many continue hiking, and it's possible, depending on the injury, but the repercussions can be serious. The standard trail joke with doctors' advice is, whatever the problem, they tell us to get off trail, so we rarely consulted them. We may rest if something hurts, then hope it goes away. I follow my physio's recommendation to wait for the pain to cease, then rest for a further 2 weeks. Aches can take 14 days to stop, potentially meaning a month out, which is unthinkable on a thru-hike. I pray for the injury gods and hike gently. Foot stress fractures were common. Repetitive movement over long periods carrying backpacks mean the muscles, unable to cope, transfer the load to the bones, resulting in hairline fractures. When I heard of PJ's problem, I feared the worst. I had faith in him and his determination to finish. But we can't ignore stress fractures, through hiking or not, so PJ appeared out of the hunt. Most sports people experience injury, and it's disappointing. They lose physical gains, and even with treatment, it's often weeks before they train, let alone compete. I've been fortunate, except for one occasion on El Camino, not to get injured while through hiking. One day in Spain, I pushed too hard and pulled my right calf. It slowed my pace, but I continued to the end in Santiago. 12 years later, and it still aches if I ask too much of it. Before my Pacific Crest Trail hike, whilst jogging, a sharp pain in my right knee forced me to stop. The diagnosis was runner's knee, a common complaint with sports people, especially runners. The prognosis was poor. My physio recommended up to 8 months of rest. 8 months! I was horrified and asked him to perform miracles in 6 weeks. A week before my departure, the pain had reduced. It was risky, he admitted, but he advised I hike. The exercise would strengthen the surrounding muscles and support the injury. His advice worked. On day 1 of the North Downs Way, a 140-mile trail near where I live, my right extensor digitorum longus, a muscle on the outside lower leg, ached. I ignored it, but later the same day, I rolled my ankle on a right-hand camber and pain shot through my leg. I foolishly carried on, and given I rarely roll my ankles, managed it again later. I hobbled for a week after finishing. The physio ordered rest, which put me out of action for 3 months. But 2 years after, though it didn't hurt, it felt like a Velcro strip was pulling away from the lower leg, then reattaching again. The drug of choice for thru-hikers is ibuprofen, used for injuries, pain, to reduce swelling and to numb muscle fatigue. I took it sparingly because of its association with stomach ulcers. It helped as I faded in the afternoon. Most took 400 milligrams, others who'd become tolerant to it needed 800 milligrams, even more. I carried caffeine tablets too. Because of an unfortunate lack of coffee bars in the Appalachian woods, I enjoyed the hit. With an immediate boost along with the ibuprofen, my body reacted gratefully. The aches subsided, the energy rocketed, and on a flat trail I'd hold 4 miles an hour. The negative side was the increased injury risk. Instead of the harsh climbs and drops, often it was the easier, flatter sections of trail where I pulled muscles. Virginia was a classic example because the trail had levelled. Bush Goggles and I enjoyed a more relaxed hike without aches and pains. We passed Jenny Knob Shelter, scampered downhill to the wonderfully sounded Lick Skillet Hollow, cranked out a further 5 miles to the Kimberling Suspension Bridge and popped out on the VA 606. Trent's Grocery was a mere half-mile away. I turned to Bush Goggles. "Hungry? Burger?" He grinned, and after feasting, we continued with full stomachs for 8 miles to the Wapiti Shelter, dodging and running scared of thunderstorms. A small shelter sat off trail, and a faint track wove to a creek through thin woodland. The rain stopped and sunlight filtered through the canopy, dancing on the ground. The wind didn't stir, and only birdsong broke a quiet evening. Its beguiling atmosphere offered no clues to the bloody events there in May 1981, or perhaps the woods still mourned. Robert Mountford Jr. and his hiking companion Susan Ramsey had stopped at the Wapiti Shelter during their thru-hike. They'd befriended a local, Randall Smith, who'd charmed his way into their trust, and he joined them at the shelter. He lived nearby in Petersburg and knew the area well. Having a fondness for the woods, he made regular trips there. A welder by trade, he worked when he needed money. After they settled to sleep, Smith shot Mountford Jr. in the head with a handgun. Ramsey was then repeatedly and violently stabbed. Post-mortem reports revealed injuries to her hands, suggesting she defended herself. When they didn't arrive in Petersburg, police searched the Wapiti shelter first as it was the nearest to town. They discovered blood between the floorboards and found Ramsey and Mountford Jr. buried in their sleeping bags nearby. They arrested Smith a few days later. He was found guilty and jailed for 32 years. There are many theories why he killed, one being he'd made a pass at Ramsey and Mountford Jr. had intervened. Some say the killings were revenge for Ramsey's rebuke and his dislike of Mountford Jr. Despite his incarceration, he didn't change. He caused no trouble in jail, was described as a model prisoner, and they released him on parole in 1996 after he'd served 15 years. He scraped a living from welding for 12 years and, out fishing in 2008, camped a mile and a half from the Wapiti shelter. He befriended Scott Johnston of Bluefield, Virginia, and his friend Sean Farmer of Tazewell, Virginia. Smith complained he'd caught nothing, and Johnston, feeling sorry for him, handed him a bag of fish from his cooler and invited him to dinner. Smith spent several hours with them after they cooked trout for him and his dog. After eating, he pulled a gun from his pocket and shot Johnston in the neck. He turned the weapon at Farmer and shot him point blank in the chest. Johnston, despite his injury, fled from the woods as bullets volleyed after him, hitting him again in the neck. Farmer struggled to his truck as Smith called him, but the gun failed to fire. He'd run out of ammunition. Farmer drove away. As his headlights picked out his friend staggering into the road, he swung the door open and they escaped. They both lived to tell the tale. Smith fled the scene in Johnston's abandoned vehicle but crashed. The police, aware of his history, arrested him. Later, an officer knocked on his cell door with food but received no answer, and they found him dead. It's believed he died from injuries sustained in the crash. I only learned of the killings after my return from the AT and realised I'd not only slept in the shelter where the murders had taken place, but possibly in the same spot either Ramsey or Mountford Jr. had met their demise. 6 miles from the Wapiti shelter, thru-hikers meet a dirt road at Sugar Run Gap. Half a mile east lies Woods Hole Hostel, which friends had recommended. Huddled along this quiet track amongst the trees, Roy and Tilly Wood opened Woods Hole in 1986. Their granddaughter, Neville, now oversees it with her husband, Michael. I crunched the gravel along Sugar Run Road and turned through the gates and admired the chestnut-coloured red-roofed house built in the 1880s. Vegetable plants brimmed with healthy, vibrant plants. Ken, Margaret, Flint, Thirsty, Bush Goggles and Fonsworth relaxed. Lasagna, fresh from his 2-day stopover in Bland, waiting out the rain, also rolled in. What a beautiful setting, detached and away from noise. I showered, did my laundry by hand as there wasn't a machine, read sitting on a log, and even managed a game of chess with lasagna on the hotel's chessboard. We ate like kings and queens, spoilt by a table groaning with home produce. Tradition of Woods Hole dictates that thru-hikers gather in a ring around the fire before eating and, holding hands, introduce themselves. As initiations filtered round the circle, I realised Fonsworth's introduction beckoned. I couldn't stop giggling, as the thought of his 8-worded title was too much. He'd finished tweaking his trial name, the longest and most original I'd heard, and Lord Horatio Fonsworth, Belvedere Bentley Tiberius III, Esquire, was where he'd settled. I slept in the outbuilding attic next to an open window, where the breeze kept me cool and moonlight filtered through. I was excited. Trail days was imminent.